Welcome to our deep dive into Seneca, like through his letters.
Yeah.
You're interested in Stoicism, but you want to see it lived out, in a real person's life.
And Seneca's perfect for that. He wasn't just a philosopher. I
Right?
mean, he was a playwright, a Roman statesman, even advisor to Nero.
Oh, yeah. That's a high-pressure job right there.
Yeah. Talk about needing to stay zen.
Yeah, exactly. So you want to get, like, practical wisdom from Seneca's letters, advice on living well when things get tough. And I guess a little peek into Roman life and values, too.
Definitely. And what's interesting is that a lot of what Seneca wrote about, resonates with us today, like finding contentment in a world that's obsessed with material things.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's almost like he's talking to us across the centuries.
Yeah.
So let's unpack one of Seneca's core ideas, living in accordance with nature. Now, I have to admit, when I first heard that, I was picturing, hugging trees and wearing sandals. Seneca's idea is a lot more nuanced than that, right?
It is. Yeah. For Seneca, it wasn't just about being an environmentalist. It was about using reason,
Yes,
that uniquely human ability to think critically and objectively, to understand the world and our place in it. It's about questioning societal norms and expectations that might be leading us astray.
So using reason to figure out what's important and what's just superficial.
Yeah.
It's choosing the path that leads to genuine fulfillment, even if it goes against the grain of what everybody else is doing.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, because Seneca believed that a lot of what society values, wealth, fame, possessions, can actually trap us in a cycle of desire and dissatisfaction.
Yeah, he even compares those alluring things to baited bounties, right? Like that tempting worm on a hook. It looks delicious, but it comes with a hidden price. So what's so bad about wanting nice things or striving for success?
Well, Seneca would say it's not about wanting those things, but how attached we become to them. He believed that when we make our happiness dependent on external factors, things we can't control, we set ourselves up for disappointment and suffering.
So it's not about denying ourselves pleasure or ambition, but finding a healthy balance.
Right.
Recognizing that true happiness comes from within, from cultivating a sense of contentment and inner peace. That doesn't rely on external validation or possessions.
Exactly. Think about it this way. If you're constantly chasing the next shiny object, you're never really present in the moment. You're always looking to what you don't have. And that can lead to this feeling of perpetual dissatisfaction, even if you get all the things you thought you wanted.
Right. It's like the grass is always greener, but maybe the real problem isn't the grass, but our perception of it, right?
Right.
Contentment is learning to appreciate the grass we're standing on, not comparing it to someone else's lawn.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. It ties into Seneca's belief that we can choose to focus on what we have rather than what we lack.
Right.
We can cultivate gratitude for simple things, a sunny day, a good conversation, a moment of peace and quiet.
It's almost like a mental shift, choosing to see the glass half full, even when life throws you curveballs. And I think that's one of the most powerful lessons from Seneca, that we have more control over our happiness than we realize.
Absolutely. And this idea of choosing our perspective, focusing on what we can control, is a key theme that runs throughout his letters.
Okay, that's a great foundation to build on. Now, another thing that struck me about Seneca's letters is the importance he places on friendship. It's not just a nice to have for him, it's essential for living a good life.
You're right. Friendship was central to his philosophy. And he had some strong opinions about how to choose friends and what true friendship really means.
Yeah, he actually advises judging potential friends before offering them your trust, which seems kind of counterintuitive. Shouldn't we give people the benefit of the doubt?
Well, Seneca believed that true friendship is too precious to risk on hasty judgments. He thought you should carefully observe a person's character, their actions, their values, before opening your heart to them.
So he's not saying be suspicious or closed off. It's more about being discerning, taking the time to get to know someone before you let them into your inner circle.
Exactly. He believed that surrounding yourself with people who share your values and challenge you to be your best self is crucial for growth and well-being.
And once you've found those true friends, those people you trust, he encourages speaking freely with them, holding nothing back.
Absolutely. Seneca believed in complete transparency and vulnerability in true friendship. He thought you should be able to share your worries, your dreams, your deepest thoughts without fear of judgment or betrayal.
He uses such powerful language to describe a true friend, someone you'd die for, someone you'd follow into exile, someone you'd put your own life up as security for.
It's a high bar, right?
Yeah.
But it makes you think about the quality of our own friendships.
Yeah.
Do we have people in our lives who we can be that open with? People who will support us no matter what?
That's a great question for our listeners. How many of our friendships reach that level of depth and commitment? And in a world that feels transactional and superficial, How can we cultivate relationships that are more meaningful and enduring?
I think Seneca would say it starts with being the kind of friend we want to have. You know, being present, being a good listener, being non-judgmental, and offering unwavering support. It's creating a space where connection and vulnerability can flourish.
And that's something we can all work on, regardless of how many friends we have or what our social lives look like. It's about making an effort to deepen the connections we already have and being open to forming new ones based on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine affection.
Exactly. And it's worth it because those deep, meaningful friendships can be a source of incredible strength and support, especially when life gets tough.
Speaking of tough times, one thing that really surprised me about Seneca is his perspective on death. It's not something he shies away from. In fact, he seems to embrace it as an inevitable part of life.
That's the thing about Stoicism. It encourages us to face even the most difficult parts of life with courage and acceptance. Seneca reminds us that death isn't something to fear. It's a natural part of the human experience, a duty we'll all eventually fulfill.
And he tells this amazing story about a Roman named Pacuvius who celebrated his own funeral every single day.
Wait, really? Every day?
Yep. After dinner, he'd have his servants carry him out on a bier while people chanted, "He has lived! He has lived!" Talk about a dramatic exit.
That's wild.
Yeah.
But there's a profound message in this, right? By confronting his mortality, Pacuvius was freeing himself from the fear of death, allowing himself to embrace the present moment. It's a radical way to remind himself every day is a gift.
Like he's saying, hey, I could be gone tomorrow, so I'm going to make the most of this day, this moment, this breath. It puts things in perspective.
It really does. It makes you wonder, are we so focused on avoiding death that we're forgetting to truly live? Are we letting our fear of the future rob us of the joy we could be experiencing right now?
I think Seneca would say we are. He'd encourage us to embrace the present moment, to appreciate the gift of life, and let go of anxieties about the future.
And that's a powerful message for us today. In a world that bombards us with what we need to do, achieve, acquire, it's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of more and forget to appreciate what we already have.
Exactly. So maybe Seneca's advice is to stop and smell the roses, savor simple pleasures, and remember that every day is a precious gift, not a dress rehearsal for some future event.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's a reminder that even facing our mortality, we can choose to live with joy, gratitude, and a deep appreciation for the beauty and wonder of life.
Okay, that's some seriously deep stuff. We've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our dive, from living in accordance with nature to the power of friendship to facing our mortality head on. What do you think? Are we ready to move on?
Absolutely. I'm eager to see what other gems of wisdom we can uncover.
Great. But before we jump in, let's take a moment to reflect on what's resonated with you so far. What stood out, and how might you apply Seneca's insights to your own life?
It's fascinating how Seneca blends these practical tips for living well with these deeper philosophical concepts. We talked about living in accordance with nature earlier, and I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that idea now?
Well, I have to admit, it's growing on me. It's not as like granola as I first thought.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see how it's about using reason to cut through the noise and figure out what really matters, aligning our actions with our values, even when those values go against what society tells us to prioritize.
Exactly. And for Seneca, that meant challenging the prevailing Roman obsession with wealth status possessions. He saw these things as like baited bounties, trapping people in a cycle of desire and dissatisfaction.
Yeah, and we can all relate to that, right? I mean, who hasn't gotten caught up in wanting the latest gadget, the bigger house, the fancier car? But Seneca's not saying we should all become like ascetics and live in poverty. He's talking about finding a healthier relationship with material things, right?
Absolutely. He believed that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in our inner state, in cultivating contentment, gratitude, a sense of purpose that goes beyond material things. He famously said, "He needs but little who desires but little."
That's such a powerful quote. It reminds me of the minimalist movement today. People downsizing their possessions, simplifying their lives, and focusing on experiences rather than stuff. It's like they're rediscovering this truth that Seneca understood centuries ago.
It's amazing how his ideas still resonate today, isn't it? And I think this idea of desiring little is key to how Seneca connected living in accordance with nature with cultivating wisdom.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Explain that connection.
Well, Seneca believed that wisdom comes from understanding our place in the grand scheme of things, recognizing that we are part of a universe governed by reason and natural laws. When we align ourselves with that reason, when we let go of our ego-driven desires and attachments, we become more receptive to wisdom.
So it's about getting out of our own way, quieting that inner voice that's always clamoring for more, 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 and tuning in to a deeper knowing that comes from connecting with something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. And that's not always easy, especially in a world that's constantly telling us to buy more, achieve more, be more. But Seneca believed it was possible. And he offered some pretty practical advice on how to cultivate wisdom in our daily lives.
Okay, give us the goods. What did Seneca recommend?
One of his key practices was mindful decision-making. He believed that we should approach every choice, big or small, with intention and awareness.
So not just reacting impulsively or getting swept up in the heat of the moment.
Right. Seneca would say, hold on a second, let's step back and consider this situation. What's the most rational course of action? What choice aligns with my values and what I know to be true?
So taking a pause, even if it's just a brief one, to check in with ourselves and make sure our actions are aligned with our intentions and our highest good.
Exactly. And that's where self-awareness comes in. Seneca believed that understanding our own tendencies, our strengths and weaknesses, is crucial for making wise choices. He'd encourage us to ask ourselves, what are my triggers? What situations bring out the worst in me? What thought patterns lead me down unhelpful paths?
It's like doing a personal inventory of our mental and emotional baggage, right? Identifying those patterns that keep us stuck.
Exactly. And once we're aware of those patterns, we can challenge them, choose a different response. We can learn to pause before reacting, question our assumptions, and make choices that are more aligned with our values and our long-term well-being.
It's like he's saying we can rewire our own brains, break free from those automatic reactions that lead to suffering.
That's the essence of Seneca's philosophy. We have more control over our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions than we often realize, and that's incredibly empowering.
It is. But let's be honest, it's not always easy to put these ideas into practice. Seneca was a brilliant philosopher, but he was also living in a very real world. He wasn't just meditating on mountaintops. He was advising an emperor, navigating political intrigue, and dealing with all the challenges of life in ancient Rome.
Yeah, that's what makes Seneca so relatable. He wasn't just spouting abstract theories, he was wrestling with these ideas in a very demanding and often dangerous life. And that makes his insights all the more valuable for us because it shows us that wisdom isn't just for saints and sages. It's something we can cultivate even in the most challenging circumstances.
Okay, so how did Seneca apply these principles in his own life? I mean, he was advising Nero, for goodness sakes. How do you teach wisdom and virtue to someone notorious for cruelty and excess?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one that's probably fascinated historians and philosophers for centuries. We don't have Nero's side of the story, but we can get some insights from Seneca's letters.
So spill the tea. What did Seneca do? Did he try to make Nero a better emperor, or was he just a pawn in a power game he couldn't win?
Well, history tells us that Nero didn't exactly become a model of virtue, but I think it's more nuanced than just saying Seneca failed. His letters show a deep understanding of the complexities of power, the challenges of leading with integrity in a corrupt system.
He must have been walking a tightrope. How do you advise someone like Nero who clearly had some, let's say, less than virtuous tendencies?
It's a question that must have haunted Seneca. His letters suggest that he believed in the power of persuasion, of gently guiding Nero toward a more virtuous path. He seems to have recognized that forcing change would be counterproductive, so he opted for a more subtle approach.
It's like he was trying to plant seeds of wisdom, hoping they might take root even in the less than fertile soil of Nero's heart. I mean, what a task.
It was a risky strategy for sure. And ultimately, it's impossible to know how much influence Seneca really had on Nero's actions. But even if he couldn't completely transform Nero, his letters suggest that he never compromised his own principles. He stayed committed to a life guided by reason and virtue, even in the midst of a corrupt and dangerous court.
That's a powerful takeaway. It suggests we can strive to live ethically and authentically even when surrounded by people who don't share our values.
Exactly. It's like he's saying that true wisdom isn't about changing the world around us. It's about changing ourselves, about becoming the best versions of ourselves, regardless of the circumstances.
It's about staying true to our own North Star, even when the winds of chaos and temptation are blowing all around us.
Okay, that's a pretty epic thought. I'm ready for another Senecaism to help guide us on this path of wisdom and virtue. Give me something to chew on, something that speaks to this idea of staying true to ourselves in a world that can sometimes feel like it's trying to pull us in a million different directions.
This quote might resonate. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult.
Whoa, that's deep. It's like he's saying that our own fear, our own hesitation can make things more difficult than they have to be. If we can summon the courage to act, to step outside our comfort zones, to challenge the status quo, then maybe those seemingly impossible tasks might start to feel a little more achievable. Exactly. It's a call to action. a reminder that we have the power to shape our own destinies, to overcome obstacles, to make a difference in the world, even if it's just in our own small corner of it.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired. But before we get too carried away with changing the world, I think it's important to bring things back to the personal level. We've been talking about wisdom and virtue in a grand philosophical sense. But how do these ideals translate into our everyday lives? How do we cultivate wisdom in the midst of, well, the mundane?
That's a great question, and I think it's one that Seneca was deeply concerned with. He recognized that true wisdom isn't just about lofty ideals. It's about how we live each day, how we interact with others, how we handle the inevitable ups and downs of life.
So it's not about retreating to a mountaintop and meditating for years on end. It's about finding wisdom in the everyday and the ordinary moments that make up our lives.
Exactly. Seneca believed that every experience, every encounter, every challenge is an opportunity for growth and learning. He was a master of what we might call micro-wisdom, finding profound insights in the insignificant details of life.
I love that term, micro-wisdom. It's like finding those nuggets of truth and insight hidden in plain sight in those everyday moments that we often take for granted. Give us an example. I'm ready to start seeing the world through Seneca's wisdom-tinted glasses.
Well, think about something as simple as taking a walk. Seneca would encourage you to pay attention to your surroundings, to notice the beauty of nature, to observe the interactions between people. He might even suggest that you reflect on the fleeting nature of life, the impermanence of all things.
It's like turning an ordinary activity into a meditation, a chance to connect with something larger than ourselves.
Exactly. Or consider a conversation with a friend. Seneca would encourage you to listen attentively, to offer support and guidance without judgment, to speak your truth with kindness and clarity.
So even our social interactions can become opportunities to practice wisdom and virtue. I'm starting to see how this whole living in accordance with nature thing can permeate every aspect of our lives.
That's the beauty of it. It's not a set of rigid rules or doctrines. It's a way of being a lens through which we can view the world and our place in it.
Okay, I'm feeling inspired. But I have to admit, I'm also feeling a bit overwhelmed. Cultivating wisdom feels like a lifelong journey, a constant process of self-reflection and growth. Where do we even begin?
Seneca would suggest that we start by examining our own beliefs and values, by questioning assumptions, by challenging the status quo. He'd encourage us to seek out mentors and teachers who can guide us. But most importantly, he'd remind us that it's a journey, not a destination.
So it's not about striving for perfection. It's about striving for progress, for continuous growth and learning. And it's okay to stumble along the way, right? I mean, Seneca was pretty critical of human folly, but he also seemed to have a lot of compassion for our inherent imperfections.
He did. He recognized that we're all works in progress, that we're going to make mistakes, that we're going to fall short of our ideals. But he also believed in the power of redemption, in our ability to learn from our mistakes and become better people as a result.
So it's not about beating ourselves up when we mess up. It's about learning from those experiences and using them as fuel for growth. It's about having compassion for ourselves and others as we navigate this messy, beautiful, and often challenging journey called life.
Beautifully said. And I think that's a perfect place to pause for now.
Agreed. We've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive, from the practicalities of mindful decision-making to the challenges of living with integrity in a world that doesn't always value virtue.
And we've explored how Seneca's own experiences, both the good and the bad, can offer valuable insights and inspiration for our own journeys.
Before we move on to the final part of our exploration, take a moment to think about what's resonated with you most deeply in this conversation. What insights have sparked your curiosity? What questions are lingering in your mind? What wisdom from Seneca might you carry with you into the rest of your day? You know, I keep thinking about that quote from last time. It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It's because we do not dare that they are difficult.
It's a powerful one, isn't it?
It is. It's like our fear can become a self-fulfilling prophecy, making things harder than they really are.
You've hit on something really important there. Seneca believed that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite it. It's all about taking responsibility for our own lives, even when things feel out of control.
We can't always choose our circumstances, but we can choose how we respond. And sometimes that means facing our fears and taking action, even when it's risky.
Exactly. And Seneca gives us some great examples of this in his own life. Remember how he dealt with his exile to Corsica?
Yeah.
Instead of being consumed by resentment and despair, he saw it as a chance for growth and self-discovery.
Yeah. He even wrote about finding joy in nature and simple pleasures, even though he was far from everything he knew. It's like he was practicing what he preached, choosing his perspective, focusing on what he could control, making the best of it.
He was a master at reframing adversity as an opportunity, and I think that's a key lesson we can learn from him. We can choose to see challenges as stepping stones, as chances to learn, adapt, and become more resilient.
It's not about denying things are tough or pretending everything's fine. It's about moving forward with grace, courage, purpose,
Yeah,
even when life throws a curveball.
absolutely. And Seneca reminds us that we all have that resilience inside us. It's just a matter of tapping into it, seeing the world through a different lens.
I'm sensing that a lot of Seneca's philosophy comes down to this: choosing our perspective, recognizing we have more power than we think to shape our own experiences even when facing hardship.
You're right.
Yeah.
And he offers practical advice on how to do that. One practice is what we might call cognitive reframing. It's about consciously challenging negative thought patterns and replacing them with more helpful ones.
So it's like when you're spiraling into worry and you tell yourself, wait, is this even true? Is there another way to look at this?
Exactly. Seneca encourages us to question those automatic negative thoughts that cause anxiety, stress, suffering. Our thoughts aren't always accurate, and we can choose which ones we focus on.
It's like we're editing our own mental movies,
Yeah.
right? We choose which scenes to highlight, which storylines to follow, and what ending we want.
That's a great analogy. It shows how important self-awareness is in Seneca's philosophy. Understanding our mental and emotional patterns is key to making good choices and living a good life.
It's about knowing the triggers that set off those negative patterns, the people, places, even certain phrases that send us down a rabbit hole of worry or self-doubt.
Exactly. And once we know our triggers, we can figure out how to manage them. Avoid situations, reframe our thinking, practice mindfulness to stay present when emotions get tough.
Building a mental toolkit, equipping ourselves to handle whatever life throws at us with grace and resilience.
That's a great way to put it. Seneca would be happy to hear you say that. He believed wisdom is a lifelong pursuit, constant learning and growth.
Not about reaching some perfect enlightenment, but striving to be better, learning from mistakes, and moving forward on the path of self-discovery.
Exactly. It's a journey worth taking, even if we never reach the final destination. Along the way, we find inner peace and contentment that nothing can take away.
It's inspiring. It makes me think about Seneca's belief that we're born for virtue, not with it. We have the potential for greatness, but it's up to us to cultivate it, to nurture those seeds of wisdom and virtue.
You've got it. That's the beauty of Seneca's philosophy. It offers a way to live a truly meaningful life, no matter our circumstances, past mistakes, or perceived limitations.
Like we're all capable of being heroes in our own stories, overcoming challenges, making a positive impact, leaving a legacy of wisdom and love.
That's beautiful. To wrap up this dive into Seneca's letters, I'll leave you with one final thought from him. Begin at once to live and count each separate day as a separate life.
Wow. He's telling us to embrace each day as a fresh start, a new chance to practice what we've learned, make choices that align with our values, and live with intention, purpose, and deep appreciation for life.
Exactly. What better way to honor Seneca than to take his words to heart and try to live with the same wisdom, courage, and compassion he showed us?
I couldn't agree more. And that brings our deep dive into Seneca's letters to a close. We hope you've enjoyed this exploration and that you'll carry some of his wisdom with you as you navigate the challenges and triumphs of your own life. Until next time, keep seeking truth, keep growing, and keep living in accordance with nature.